He started out as a frail young man, discredited even by his own allies. But within a few years, he became the most powerful man on the planet. Between bloody conspiracies, epic battles, and dangerous alliances, he built a legacy that spanned centuries. Octavius Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Today, you'll learn the true story of how this man shaped the fate of the ancient world. All the Emperors of Rome. Episode 1. Octavio Augusto. Augustus, born 23rd September 63 BC, died 19th August 14 AD, Nola, near Naples, Italy, was the first Roman emperor after the Republic, which had been finally destroyed by the dictatorship of Julius Caesar, his great-uncle and adoptive father. His autocratic regime is known as Principality because he was the princeps, the first citizen, at the head of that set of apparently renewed republican institutions which alone made his autocracy palatable. With unlimited patience, skill, and efficiency, he reshaped every aspect of Roman life and brought lasting peace and prosperity to the Greco-Roman world. He is one of the leading figures of classical antiquity. Gaius Octavius was from a prosperous family that had long been settled in Velletri, southeast of Rome. His father, who died in 59 BC, was the first in the family to become a Roman senator and was elected to the annual high office of the praetorship, which ranked second in the political hierarchy after the consulship. Gaius Octavius's mother, Attia, was the daughter of Julia, sister of Julius Caesar, and it was Caesar who launched the young Octavian into Roman public life. At the age of 12, he made his debut by delivering the funeral speech for his grandmother Julia. 3 or 4 years later, he received the coveted membership in the Council of Priests, Pontiffs. In 46 BC, he accompanied Caesar, now dictator, in his triumphal procession after his victory in Africa over his opponents in the Civil War. And the following year, despite failing health, he joined the dictator in Spain. He was in Apollonia, now Albania, completing his academic and military studies when, in 44 BC, he learned that Julius Caesar had been assassinated.
Upon returning to Italy, he was told that Caesar, in his will, had adopted him as a son and had made him his chief personal heir. He was only 18 years old when, against the advice of his stepfather and others, he decided to take up this dangerous inheritance and left for Rome. Mark Antony, Caesar's top lieutenant, who had taken possession of his documents and assets and hoped to be the main heir, refused to hand over any part of Caesar's funds, forcing Octavius to pay the late dictator's legacies to the Roman population with the funds he was able to raise. Caesar's assassins, Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, ignored him and withdrew to the east. Cicero, the famous orator who was one of Rome's leading statesmen, hoped to make use of it but underestimated its abilities. By holding public games instituted by Caesar to insinuate himself with the city's population, Octavius managed to win over a considerable number of the dictator's troops for his own loyalty. The Senate, encouraged by Cicero, broke with Antony, asked Octavius for help, granting him the rank of senator despite his youth, and joined the campaign of Mutina, modern-day Modena, against Antony, who was forced to retreat to Gaul. When the consuls commanding the Senate's forces lost their lives, Octavian's soldiers forced the Senate to grant him a vacant consulship. Under the name Gaius Julius Caesar, he obtained official recognition as Caesar's adopted son. Although it was normal to add Octavian, in reference to his original surname, he preferred not to do so. Today, however, he is customarily described as Octavian until the date he assumed the designation Augustus. Octavius soon came to terms with Antony and with another of Caesar's main supporters, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, who succeeded him as high priest. On November 27, 43 BC, the three men were formally given a 5-year dictatorial appointment as triumvirs for the reconstitution of the state, the second triumvirate, the first being the informal pact between Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. The east was occupied by Brutus and Cassius, but the triumvirs divided the west between themselves. They drew up a list of outlawed political enemies, and subsequent executions included 300 senators, one of whom was Cicero, Antony's enemy, and 2,000 members of the class below the senators, the equites or knights. The recognition of Julius Caesar as god of the Roman state in January 42 BC increased Octavian's prestige as the son of a god. He and Antony crossed the Adriatic, and under Antony's leadership, Octavius was ill, won the 2 battles of Philippi against Brutus and Cassius, both of whom committed suicide. Antony, the eldest partner, received the East and Gaul, and Octavius returned to Italy, where the difficulties caused by the colonization of his veterans involved him in the Perusian War, decided in his favor in Perugia, present-day Perugia, against Antony's brother and wife. In order to appease another potential enemy, Sextus Pompey, son of Pompey the Great, who had seized Sicily and the sea lanes, Octavius married Scribonia, a relative of Sextus, although he soon divorced her over personal incompatibility. These kinship ties did not prevent Sextus, after the Perusian War, from making proposals to Antony, but Antony rejected them and came to a new understanding with Octavius in the Treaty of Brundisium, under the terms of which Octavian would get all of the West, except Africa, which Lepidus was allowed to keep, and Italy, which, although supposedly neutral, was in fact controlled by Octavius. The East would again stay with Antony, and it was agreed that Antony, who had spent the previous winter with Queen Cleopatra in Egypt, would marry Octavia's sister, Octavia. The peoples of the empire were overjoyed by the treaty, which seemed to promise an end to so many years of civil war. In 38 BC, Octavius established a significant new bond with the aristocracy through his marriage to Livia Drusilla.
But a reconciliation with Sextus Pompey failed, and Octavius soon found himself embroiled in a serious war against him. When his first operations against Sextus's Sicilian bases proved disastrous, he felt compelled to enter into a new pact with Antony at Tarentum, Taranto, in 37 BC. Antony was to provide Octavian with ships in exchange for the troops needed for his impending war against the empire's eastern neighbor, Parthia, and its Mede allies. Antony surrendered the ships, but Octavian never sent the troops. The treaty also provided for the renewal of the Second Triumvirate for 5 years, until the end of 33 BC. The following year, the balance of power began to shift. While Antony's eastern expedition failed, Octavian's fleet, commanded by his old schoolmate Marcus Agrippa, who, though unpopular with the influential nobles, was an admiral of genius, utterly defeated Sextus Pompey off Cape Naulochus, Veneticus, in Sicily. At this point, the third triumvir, Lepidus, seeking to challenge Octavian's supremacy in the west by force, was disarmed by Octavian, deprived of his triumphal position, and forced into retirement. Ignoring Antony's right to settle his own veterans in Italy and recruit new troops, Octavius dismissed many legionaries and founded settlements for them. His deliberate rivalry with Antony for eventual domination of the Roman world became increasingly apparent. Octavius's marriage 2 years earlier had begun to win over some of the nobles who had previously been Antony's supporters. Octavius also launched elaborate religious and patriotic advertising centered on the classical god of order, Apollo, in contrast to Antony's less Roman patron, Dionysus, Bacchus. In addition, Octavius began to prefix his name with the designation Imperator to suggest that he was the commander par excellence. And now, while continuing to use his triumphant powers, he omitted all references to them from his coins, gradually concentrating on the simple and emotive name, Caesar, son of one god. But if Octavius was to compete with Antony's military seniority, successes in a foreign war were necessary. And so, between 35 and 33 BC, Octavian fought 3 successive campaigns in Illyria and Dalmatia, parts of present-day Slovenia and Croatia, to protect nearby northeastern Italy. With the help of Agrippa, he also lavished large sums on the adornment of Rome. When Octavius fomented public outcry against Antony's territorial donations to Cleopatra, it was clear that a confrontation between the two men was imminent. By 32 BC, the triumvirate had officially ended, and Octavius, unlike Antony, declared that he would no longer employ his powers. Amid a virulent exchange of propaganda, Antony divorced Octavia, after which his brother, Octavius, seized Antony's will and claimed to find in it harmful evidence of Cleopatra's power over him. Each leader induced the populations under his control to swear formal allegiance to his own cause. Then, in spite of the grave discontent aroused by his exactions in Italy, Octavius declared war, not against Antony, but against Cleopatra.
Accompanied by her, Antony had sent his fleet and army to protect strong points along the coast of western Greece. But in 31 BC, Octavian sent Agrippa at the very beginning of the year to capture Matana on the southwestern tip of the country. His enemies were taken by surprise, and upon the arrival of Octavian himself, leaving his friend and Etruscan advisor Gaius Maecenas in charge of Italy, he and Agrippa soon closed Antony's fleet within the Gulf of Ambracia, Arta. At the Battle of Actium, Antony attempted to free his ships in hopes of continuing the fight elsewhere. Although Cleopatra and Antony managed to escape, only a quarter of their fleet managed to follow them. Cleopatra and Antony fled to Egypt and committed suicide when Octavius captured the country the following year. Octavian annexed Egypt and kept it under his direct control. The seizure of Cleopatra's treasure allowed her to bribe her veterans and make her finally master of the entire Greco-Roman world. From there, by a long and gradual series of experimental and patient measures, he established the Roman Principate, a system of government which enabled him to maintain, in all essential respects, absolute control. Gradually reducing his 60 legions to 28, he retained approximately 150,000 legionaries, mostly Italians, and supplemented them with roughly the same number of auxiliaries coming from the provinces. A permanent bodyguard, the Praetorians, based on the bodyguards maintained by previous generals, were stationed partly in Rome and partly in other Italian cities. An excellent road network was created to maintain internal order and facilitate trade, and an efficient fleet was organized to police the Mediterranean. In 28 BC, Octavian and Agrippa conducted a census of the civilian population, the first of 3 during the Augustus government and administration. Recalling, however, that Caesar had been assassinated because of his recourse to naked power, Octavius realized that the ruling class would welcome him as the terminator of the civil war only if he concealed his autocracy under provisions avowedly reminiscent of republican traditions. From 31 to 23 BC, the constitutional basis of his power remained a continuous succession of consulships. But in January 27 BC, he ostensibly transferred the state at the free disposal of the Senate and the people, earning the deceptive, though apparently plausible tribute that he had restored the republic. At the same time, he was given a 10-year term of government, provincia, comprising Spain, Gaul, and Syria, the 3 regions containing most of the army. The remaining provinces would be governed by proconsuls appointed by the Senate in the old republican style. Octavius, however, believed that his supreme prestige, crystallized in the significant term auctoritas, protected him against any challenge from these characters, and he was in fact able, more or less indirectly, to influence their appointments, just as he was able, on the rare occasions when he considered it desirable, to influence appointments to the consulates and other metropolitan offices that continued to exist in a republican manner.
The death in 12 BC of Lepidus allowed Augustus to finally succeed him as the official head of the Roman religion, the high priest, Pontifex Maximus. In the same year, Agrippa also died. Augustus forced his widow, Julia, to marry Tiberius against their wishes. For the next 3 years, however, Tiberius was absent in the field, reducing Pannonia to the middle Danube, while his brother Drusus crossed the Rhine border and invaded Germany as far as the Elbe, where he died in 9 BC. The following year, Augustus lost another of his intimates, Maecenas, who had been his advisor in his early days and a prominent patron of letters. Tiberius, who replaced Drusus in Germania, was elevated in 6 BC to a share of his stepfather's tribunician power, but soon afterwards he retired to the island of Rhodes. This was attributed to the jealousy of his stepson-nephew Gaius Caesar, who was introduced to public life with great fanfare the following year, and the same praises were made to his brother Lucius in 2 BC, the year in which Augustus received his climactic title Father of the Fatherland, Pater Patriae. Gaius was sent to the east and Lucius to the west. Both, however, soon died. Tiberius returned home in 2, and in 4 Augustus adopted him as his son, who in turn was forced to adopt Germanicus, the son of his brother Drusus. The powers conferred on Tiberius made him almost equal to Augustus in everything except prestige. Tiberius's next task was to consolidate the invasion and provincial organization of Germania, 4 to 5 AD. An invasion of Bohemia was planned and had already been launched in 2 directions when news arrived on 6 that Pannonia and Illyricum had revolted. The rebellion took 3 years to suppress, and this had only been completed when Arminius raised the Germans against their Roman governor Varus and destroyed him and his 3 legions. As Augustus could not replace the troops promptly, the annexation of West Germany and Bohemia was postponed indefinitely. Tiberius and Germanicus were sent to consolidate the Rhine frontier.
Although Augustus was now feeling his age, these years in association with Tiberius were marked by administrative innovations. The annexation of Judea in 6 AD, his client king Herod the Great had died 10 years earlier, the establishment in Rome in the same year of a fire brigade with police functions, supplemented 7 years later by a regular police force, cohorts urbanae, the creation of a military treasury, aerarium militare, to fund the costs of the soldiers' pensions with taxes, and the conversion of the hitherto occasional appointment of city mayor, prefectus urbi, into a permanent office, 13 AD, when, in the same year, Augustus's powers were renewed for 10 years. Such renewals had been granted at intervals throughout the reign. Tiberius was made his equal in all constitutional respects. In April, Augustus deposited his will in the house of the Vestals in Rome. It included a summary of the empire's military and financial resources, Breviarium Totius Imperii, and his political testament known as the Res Gestae Divi Augusti, Conquests of the Divine Augustus. The best preserved copy of this latter document is on the walls of the Temple of Rome and Augustus in Ankara, Turkey, the Monumentum Ankaranum. In 14 AD, Tiberius was due to leave for Illyricum, but was recalled by the news that Augustus was seriously ill. He died on August 19, and on September 17, the Senate enrolled him among the gods of the Roman state. By this time, Tiberius had succeeded him as the second Roman emperor, although the formalities involved in the succession proved embarrassing both for him and for the Senate, because Augustus's principate was not, constitutionally speaking, hereditary or continuous. Like other emperors, Tiberius took the designation Augustus as an additional title of his own. Agrippa Postumus, who had been named his co-heir but subsequently banished, was executed. The order to kill him may have already been given by Augustus, but this is not certain. Augustus was a cultured man, author of several works, all of which have been lost: a pamphlet against Brutus, an exhortation to philosophy, an account of his own childhood, a biography of Drusus, poems and epigrams. The conventional view of his character distinguishes between his cruelty in the early years and his mildness in adulthood, but there was not so much need for cruelty afterwards, and when necessary, notably in the suppression of alleged conspiracies, he was still ready to apply it. It is likely that nothing short of this degree of political cruelty could have achieved such enormous results. His home life, however, was simple and homely. Within his family, the successive deaths of those he had designated as his successors or helpers caused him much grief and disappointment. His devotion to his wife Livia Drusilla remained constant, although, like other Romans, he was unfaithful. His surviving letters show kindness to his relatives. However, he exiled his daughter, Julia, for offending his public moral attitudes, and he exiled his daughter to Agrippa for the same reason. He also exiled Agrippa and Julia's son, Agrippa Posthumus, although the suspicion that he later killed him is unproven. As for Augustus's male relatives who were his attendants, he was loyal to them, but pressed them as much as himself. He needed them because the burden was too heavy, and he needed them especially in the military sphere because he was not a great commander. In Agrippa and Tiberius and several others, he had men who supplied this deficiency, and although on his deathbed he counseled against further expansion of the empire, he himself, with their help, expanded his frontiers in many directions. His physical condition was subject to a number of ailments and weaknesses, many of them recurrent. Indeed, in his youth particularly, it was only his indomitable will that allowed him to survive, a strange harbinger of an unprecedented and unrivaled life of work. His appearance is described by biographer Suetonius. He was exceptionally handsome and extremely graceful in all periods of his life, although he did not care for personal adornments. His expression, both in conversation and in silence, was calm and soft. He had clear, bright eyes in which he liked to believe that there was a kind of divine power, and he was very pleased, whenever he looked intently at someone, to let his face fall as if he were in front of the sunshine. His teeth were well separated, small and unkempt. Her hair was slightly curly and with a tendency to gold. His eyebrows met. Her complexion was between brunette and fair. He was short, but this was concealed by the beautiful proportions and symmetry of his figure, and was only noticeable in comparison to some taller person standing next to him. Augustus's countenance proved to be a boon to the Hellenized Greeks and Easterners, who were the best sculptors of the day, for they elevated his features to a moving and unforgettable imperial type, which Napoleon's artists, among others, enthusiastically imitated. The contemporary busts of Augustus, echoed on his coins, were part of a significant renaissance of the arts, in which Italic and Hellenic styles blended discreetly and brilliantly. There are still in Rome the severe but delicate reliefs of the Ara Pacis, or Altar of Peace, representing a religious procession in which national leaders participate. There are also scenes from Roman mythology. The altar was dedicated by the Senate and the people of Rome in 13 BC to commemorate the pacification of Gaul and Spain.
The architectural masterpieces of the time were also numerous, and something of their monumental grandeur and classical purity can be seen today in Rome in the ruins of the Theater of Marcellus and the massive Forum of Augustus, flanked by colonnades and culminating in the Temple of Mars, the Avenger of Julius Caesar. Outside Rome, too, there are abundant memorials to the Augustan age. On both sides of the Alps, for example, there are monuments to celebrate the submission and loyalty of local tribes, an elegant arch at Segusio, Susa, and a square stone trophy topped by a cylindrical drum at La Turbie. From Livia's mansion on the outskirts of Rome in Prima Porta comes a reminder that not all art of the time was formal and grandiose. One of the rooms is adorned with mural paintings depicting an enchanted garden. In addition to a trellis, there are orchards and flower beds, in which birds and insects perch among the foliage. Augusto himself was not interested in personal luxury. However, if he or his companions had any free time, such were the rooms in which they spent it. The life of Octavius Augustus shows us that greatness is born of adversity, and that a single man can redefine the course of history. But this is just one of the many stories that Rome left to the world. If you've stayed this far, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and share this video, because there are still many secrets and revelations of antiquity that need to be told. See you on the next journey through the hidden history of humanity.